From Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
It's time to write another budget. What could go wrong? Welcome to the Thursday edition of Balance of Power here on Bloomberg TV and radio as lawmakers here in Washington turn their attention to the next fiscal year in hopes of avoiding a government shutdown in September. The clock is ticking. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz in Washington. Kailey, Congress has plans to do a few other things first, like claw back money that was approved in the last budget.
Yeah, the rescissions package is what the Senate is actively working on and could be one of the complicating factors if Republicans are to reach a bipartisan compromise with Democrats in order to keep the government open and funded. While you may think it feels like they have plenty of time to do so, September 30th still feels far away as we're midsummer right now. Just keep in mind, Congress spends the entirety of the month of August away from Washington. So it's not that many legislative
22 days
Probably
or something?
21 now,
Yeah, Kailey dropped that number on me yesterday, which puts things in perspective here. If you follow this program, you know how difficult it is to write a budget, and we haven't seen a real budget come through regular order with 12 spending bills signed into law in, well, years. And so why would this time be any different?
Well, perhaps it won't be. Perhaps it will be. We just don't know yet. What we do know is that there is no deal between Republicans and Democrats at this point, and it's unclear when and if one will materialize. It's also unclear if the aforementioned rescissions package is actually going to be able to pass the Senate, at least in its current form.
That's right. We're going to talk about the future of that potential rescissions plan and the aftermath of passing the president's big, beautiful bill coming up with Congressman Chuck Fleischman, Republican from Tennessee. We'll also spend time with Senator Shelley Moore Capito, Republican from West Virginia, to get a sense of what's coming next.
Yep, so we have a lot for you this hour from Capitol Hill, but we begin, as always, with a look at Wall Street. And Charlie Pellet joins us with a check on the markets from New York. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much. And here's what's going on. We got the S&P 500 index trading close to a record, just a few points away from its all-time high. The S&P higher by 15 now, up by about 0.2%. An upbeat outlook from Delta spurring an industry rally. The Dow up 242 now, up 0.5%, 44,700 by the way on the Dow. NASDAQ down 5 right now. Little change, has been swinging between gains and losses in the red right now, but the key takeaway for NASDAQ, little changed. 10-year at 4.36% with a 2-year that's currently yielding 3.88%. Spot gold flat on the day, up less than 0.1%, 33.15 the ounce, and tumble for West Texas Intermediate crude down almost 2.5% right now, 66.72 for a barrel of WTI. Bitcoin 112,681 on Bitcoin, trading at a record. Bitcoin up by 1.7%. Delta reinstating a profit outlook for the year, says travelers are coming back. Delta Airlines ripping higher. Delta right now up by 12.4%. Other airlines also advancing. American Airlines Group up 12.3%, and United Airlines Holdings up by 15%. JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon says a EU-US tariff framework needs to get done. Dimon making that remark in Ireland at an event with Deputy Prime Minister Simon Harris. Again, recapping, S&P right now higher by 16, up by about 0.2%. Balance of Power continues, the Thursday edition. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
All right, Charlie Pellet in New York checking on the markets for us. Thank you so much. Meantime, here in Washington, at least one chamber of Congress is hard at work today. The Senate is in session. The House, of course, not formally in session, taking their extended July 4th recess, though they will be back next week. And in addition, Joe, to a rescissions package that is facing a hard deadline of July 18th to pass, or else Congress, the money Congress appropriated is going to have to be spent by the administration. They also are starting to get to work on appropriations, knowing that a deadline is looming in September 30th. If you want to keep the government open, you got to figure out how to keep the lights on.
This is true. This is the actual sausage being made once again. People might think the big, beautiful bill was actually the budget because we talked about the fact that it was reconciliation. It had to involve budget matters. But this is the spending plan for the next fiscal year. And after what you just told us, 20 days, I think, of legislative work left in this fiscal year could make this a real hill to climb when it comes to lawmakers. You're looking at a September 30 deadline. Erik Wasson is covering all of this for us from Capitol Hill, reporting live for Bloomberg. Erik, here we go again on this process. How difficult is this going to be?
I just came from a Senate Appropriations Committee. This is the spending panel in the Senate. Very interesting votes. They're moving forward with 3 bills funding the Commerce Department, NASA, Agriculture Department. They're really differing from the Trump administration. The Trump administration has put forward a budget with deep cuts to domestic agencies. Here we're basically seeing sort of basically flatline budgets, but resisting cuts in personnel to the Weather Service, resisting cuts to NASA. So the Senate, at least, is already drawing a line in contrast to the House and the White House on these deep budget cuts. There are also skirmishes going on trying to require the same level of federal personnel. The government, Trump administration is undertaking mass layoffs of federal workers, but there seems to be some ability to still give them some discretion. We're seeing this played out in real time. A very interesting amendment by Chris Van Hollen to require the FBI to move to Maryland, which was the plan until Trump said it's going to move across the street to the Reagan building. That actually passed as Lisa Murkowski, sort of become a maverick Republican, backed the amendment. She's very concerned with the administration's doing. Big picture, it's going to be very hard to get spending bills done by September 30th. I'm expecting another stopgap measure, maybe to Christmas. But there's going to be a major battle over this rescissions package, over the administration's attempt to impound and seize funds, which is just roiling the ability to get these bipartisan deals. Susan Collins, the head of the Appropriations Committee, told me exclusively that there are going to be amendments to the rescission package that she's going to propose, but she's worried Democrats will come back, even if she proposes saving PBS or parts of NPR from cuts, and vote those amendments down in order to play politics to make her reelection effort that much harder.
Well, so when we consider the rescissions package, Erik, if it's going to make it harder to get any kind of ultimate spending deal with Democrats, is there a chance that it doesn't pass at all, even in changed form?
I think there is. Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski are on the record opposing it in its House form. They could perhaps vote for it if the Collins amendment passes. There are other members like Jerry Moran of Kansas, Tom Tillis retiring of North Carolina, Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, who are concerned. They may in the end vote for it. You need more than just Collins and Murkowski to vote against it. This can pass with just 50 votes. And that's the point Democrats are making. Normally these spending bills require 60 votes. The Republicans can then come back the next week and just with 50 votes cancel things that they didn't want. They feel that's undermining any ability to get a bipartisan appropriations bill done. I do think eventually we may see a government shutdown. I don't think it's going to be October 1st. It could be later in the year, however.
All right. Bloomberg's Erik Wasson covering Congress for us live from Capitol Hill on Bloomberg TV and radio. Thank you so much. And now live in our Washington, D.C. studio, someone who is intimately familiar with this process as well, sitting on the Appropriations Committee in the House, Congressman Chuck Fleischman is joining us, Republican representing Tennessee's 3rd District. Congressman, welcome back to Balance of Power. Always great to have you and nice to see you in studio.
Thank you.
Because you're here in studio, I could see you nodding along when Erik was suggesting it's going to be really hard to meet that September 30th deadline. You're betting on a continuing resolution.
Well, I'm an optimist. I'm always betting on a budget, but probably if you look at where things are, we never want to see a government shutdown. I've lived through 3. It's not good. It costs more to reopen, and it just really is disadvantageous for the entire nation, including markets and the like. But what do I think will happen? I'm actually writing the energy and water bill for appropriations. We're going to mark that up next week in full committee. But the reality is, you look at the clock and things like that, probably a short-term CR, he's right. We do not want a government shutdown. But the key thing to remember, and I try to tell my friends in my party this, it's going to take 60 votes in the Senate to get an appropriations package, unlike reconciliation.
So will Republicans have a posture that involves Democrats in this process? What are you hearing from your colleagues across the aisle?
That's an interesting question. Right now, we're not receiving any help from Democrats. I can tell you with pretty certainty that my bill will pass out of my committee next week with all Republican votes. Now, when we go to the floor, that may be a different story. We have obviously 3 wonderful factions in our party. Our moderates are center right. I'm in the center right. And then our folks who are further to the right. So we've got to make sure that we hold our Republican votes together. But every once in a while, when we see increases, for example, in the Office of Science, which I'm going to put forth, in nuclear energy, and I'm getting tremendous bipartisan and bicameral support. Young progressives who agree with me on nothing come to me and support me on new nuclear. So we've got some things in some of these bills that are going to be attractive. I just don't know whether or not their leadership team in the House and in the Senate will allow them to do that. But The country does not want another continuing resolution. I don't think we've ever had two in a row. They're never good. They're preferable to a government shutdown, but they're never good. We need a budget.
Well, and so if getting Democrats on board with the budget is required here, to your point on needing 60 votes in the Senate, do you see the rescissions package currently being considered by the Senate as posing a danger to that bipartisan effort?
There's no question that it's less palatable to our friends in the Senate, both Republican and I think Democratic over there, largely Democrats. It will have a much easier time in the House. Remember, the rescission is rescinding, taking back money that's already been appropriated.
Which is why Democrats are saying, why would we make an appropriations deal with you if you can recant on it?
Indeed. But going forward, and again, the eternal optimist in me says, let's look forward. Let's get our budget done. The energy and water bill that I've written this year for the House is as strong as it was in 24. We passed it. It was great for energy, especially new nuclear. 25, we didn't get there. Why? Because of the continuing resolution. So the reality is you get out there, you put your best work product forward. The other Cardinals, subcommittee chairs on appropriations, Republicans have written very good bills. We've passed some. Some are going to be very difficult to pass.
What do you think about the Mike Rounds of the world who worry about eliminating funding for NPR? And I ask you this because, I believe it was Bill Cassidy said last evening, a senator from Louisiana, we've got to cut the funding because it's a partisan operation. But there are some lawmakers like Senator Rounds who say this is a lifeline for people in rural areas. You might not like what's on the NPR network, but these local newsrooms are delivering critical emergency information. Does he have a point?
Well, he has a vote. I don't know if he has a point, but he has a vote. And I have heard that rhetoric coming from some of my Republican colleagues. Yeah. And prior to this discourse, I never did understand or know that that dynamic was out there. They feel that that is a lifeline to many areas in rural America. So if a senator particularly feels that strongly about it, it is going to have to be addressed. Again, there's not always an equal weight between the House and the Senate. One senator can really derail or stop a process. So we have to listen to that. However, we need to see strong reforms. I think at NPR there are things that are done there that really need to be addressed. I would like to see more of a political balance like we do on your great show. We've got to listen to both sides and let the American people then make their decisions. But I come from the right, others come from the left or the center. But the reality is we need balance.
Well, as Joe makes the point about the role of public notification, especially in these rural areas, that brings me to a question around emergency response, given what we've just seen play out in Texas, what frankly is still unfolding before our eyes with so many people remaining missing in Hill Country. Tennessee is obviously no stranger to natural disasters either. And I'm wondering if you're learning lessons about the way in which information was distributed, if it's too early to have those conversations as this still is an active rescue effort, and the conversation around reforms to FEMA as well as this teaching us that you still need to have the federal response able to be put into place.
You raise an excellent point. Anytime we have a national disaster, whether it's in Tennessee or anywhere across the great United States, there's sadness, there's disaster, there's tragedy, there's sadly loss of life and the like. After the event, we can learn from these events, sometimes how to predict these. We've seen Doppler radars and things put in my state over the years to watch hurricanes and watch tornadoes. There's a lot of tornadoes in Tennessee that touch down. These flooding incidents were horrific. The one in Texas is of a magnitude I don't think that we've seen in a long time. It's really, really horrible. FEMA will be looked at. Obviously, I know Christine Noem very well. I actually came into Congress with Secretary Noem. Wonderful lady. She'll do a great job. I think President Trump will do a good job. But I think the American people want to see reform. They want to see these largest federal organizations, agencies that have just really year after year just had bigger budgets, bloated budgets, and have not really spent wisely. I think if we start to spend our money more wisely, they need to be funded. I don't think you'll see FEMA go away, but I think you're going to see a reformed, stronger FEMA, as well as other federal organizations that are going to be more responsive to their ultimate constituents.
Well, this event in Texas also reminds us of the improvements needed to the grid, the electric grid that we talked to you about a lot, hardening the grid as well. We just saw the president's big, beautiful bill pass. You were part of the celebration, of course, and we saw a watering down of incentives for solar and wind. Did this bill do enough to secure nuclear, which is one of your most passionate issues.
Thank you. Yes, it did a lot for nuclear. At first, we were very concerned. I was very concerned, as was our very good Secretary of Energy, Chris Wright, wonderful man, doing a good job, about the nuclear tax credits. Excuse the pun, nuclear is hot right now. There's a lot of private investment. Markets are moving towards investing a lot of capital, and that was not the case 5 or 10 years ago. New nuclear is so important. Big nuclear is important. I mean, the larger nuclear power plants. We're seeing 3 Mile Island reopen. We're going to see a power plant in Michigan, an older one opened. We had Vogtle in Georgia. So we're going to have small, mid-size, and larger nuclear power plants. It's reliable. It's resilient. But yes, the big, beautiful bill was very good for nuclear. I don't think it was as disadvantageous to some of the things as solar as some of the people think it will be. Solar, I think, is here to stay, but it's got to find its place in the market. Wind has problems. Wind has major, major problems. But ultimately, we're going to see natural gas come back very strong. I think it's a very good bridge fuel. We're seeing TVA, my utility, building more gas as we get to nuclear. Nuclear is incredible, but new nuclear right now is going to take a lot of capital to build the first of a kinds. But when you build the 10th and the 100th, it will drop down in costs. But the nuclear industry in America is booming in every way.
Well, and when we consider the role nuclear may have in powering artificial intelligence and data centers going forward, to get that power to a data center, to allow the data center and the data centers being built to allow that to happen, you need copper for a lot of that transit. And the president says effective August 1st, there's going to be a 50% tariff on copper. Do you worry about the potential ramifications of that, knowing that by and large, it does not seem we have adequate supply to meet the kind of demand that we are expected to see?
We're going to wait and see where the president goes with copper, but you're absolutely right. Not only copper, but there's other metals and minerals that are important for this process. It's one of the reasons I support our national labs through the Office of Science. I think I have the best in the country at Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Oak Ridge. But the reality is our labs are looking at ways to use other products. Unfortunately, the Chinese have about a 90% share of this market. They control a lot of this market. We've allowed that to happen. As we regain some of that control with existing rare earths and things like that, it's important. But the reality is maybe we can use our labs to go out and find alternates that are more reliable, less expensive, more resilient. And that's part of our great national research that I don't think any other country, even the Chinese, can match.
We actually spent some time with a young nuclear entrepreneur who was at the White House a couple of weeks ago to talk about the future of this technology. The governor of Utah joined him on the air to talk about their project together. How quickly will we see these small modular nuclear reactors being permitted for use? I realize a big nuke plant is another matter, but these small modular reactors could be something that we see much sooner.
Well, fortunately, in the great state of Tennessee, with our great utility, the Tennessee Valley Authority, we actually have a permitted site at Clinch River. And that would be for an SMR, a small modular reactor with less output. They're smaller to build. They're easier to license. They've chosen a GE Hitachi model, which basically uses the existing fuel supply. So when you talk SMRs, you have to say, what would the SMR of today look like, and then maybe the SMR in 5 or 10 years? The reason for the other SMRs, we have very good designs out there, TerraPower, X-Energy, but they require a higher fuel. It's called HALEU. And actually, sadly, Russia produces a lot of HALEU. There's going to be a ban on that in 2028, but that's why I've worked so hard in fiscal 2024 to put up $2.7 billion so that the United States could then begin to have HALEU and LEU. Of course, we have LEU as an existing fuel, but we want to start enriching uranium domestically again. Think about it. We're the birthplace of the Manhattan Project. We started this technology, and we've let it basically wither away. America is coming back, so we have American companies doing it. We're attracting other foreign countries to this. Urenco and Orano are in the space, but Centrus is an American company doing this. So that is the fuel end of that. But right now, to get one built, we need to use, in my view, existing fuel supply, LEU, that they're using in the big plants, and designs that work. So Tennessee will lead in this regard. Utah will also be leading, and our friends in Idaho. I can't leave them out.
Well, on the subject of Tennessee, knowing that, of course, you're fresh off of the effort to pass the One Big Beautiful Bill, yes, what impact are you expecting in Tennessee of the changes that were made in that bill to the way in which Medicaid benefits can be accessed and distributed? Who qualifies for them? What are you preparing your constituents for?
It's another great question. I just returned from home. I flew up this morning from Chattanooga, so I've been here in Chattanooga the past few days. I came up to have dinner with our great speaker, Mike Johnson, tonight. Most of my constituents, not all, everywhere I went, in rural America, very, very strong for the Big Beautiful Bill, no question about that. In Oak Ridge, I went up there, the same situation. The few Democrats I ran into, candidly, and my district is ruby red, but I represent all my constituents, and I'm very cognizant of that. Just as I tell friends of mine who are Republicans in Massachusetts and in blue states, their voice needs to be heard too. We're all Americans. The Democrats in the district are livid. They do not like this bill. The Republicans and independents I spoke with, very, very positive about that. Why? Number one, we raised the debt limit. That does not get talked about much. We raised it by $5 trillion. Why is that important? We were on the verge of a default. Yep. And give President Trump good credit. When he was talking to the members about why we needed to pass this thing, that was a sleeper that most people don't want to lead with. That's not your best card that you want to play with the American people, especially in our party. I mean, those are the strongest calls I'll get at our office when on the precipice of raising the national debt. But they say, no, don't do it. We can never go into default. Yeah. So that was done. The tax situation is something that's going to impact most people. No tax on tips. I eat out a lot. The servers are happy. But overwhelmingly, where I live, it's not a hard sell. In bluer states, it's going to be a hard sell or a no sell.
Congressman, it's great to see you. Tell the speaker we'd love for him to join our conversation next time you come to see us.
Yes, sir.
I should let everyone know. Well, we like visiting with you. You're writing books now. This is a novel, Once Upon an Empire by Chuck Fleischman. Kailey, the review on the cover is from Kevin McCarthy, a former speaker of the House of Representatives.
And he
Congrats on the new book.
And I got a wonderful letter from Donald Trump. He read it and liked it. It's political fiction. I promise all my works are works of fiction. Yeah. So it's time to make America think again.
We're going to stick with the facts here for now. Congressman, great to see you. Chuck Fleischman, as we add the voice of Senator Shelley Moore Capito, another Republican member here, with the idea of rescissions coming up very quickly here from West Virginia. Senator, it's great to see you back on Bloomberg TV and radio. We were just discussing this $9 billion+ rescissions package. Will it pass?
Well, I think we're going to be considering it next week. We are now looking at the details of the rescission package. It's a $9 billion package, mostly USAID, but also Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And we may make some adjustments there in terms of where we think this may have gone too far in some cases. And so we're in the process of that right now.
Well, and will the end result of that process, Senator, risk being that Democrats do not find themselves ultra willing for a bipartisan compromise on appropriations, on keeping the government funded beyond September 30th, because they know there's always a risk that funding gets rescinded?
Well, I think that the Democrats are certainly making that argument. I think basically the overwhelming opinion across the country and what President Trump campaigned on is that the USAID money, much of it, and this is not cutting all of it, of course, but much of it is used for ways that are really not benefiting global health and others that it's advertised for. And also the fact that the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, particularly on the NPR side, has for years been very much a left-leaning organization, and why are we using our taxpayer dollars for this? So these are pretty well-defined areas that the president talked about, so the Democrats shouldn't be surprised by this. We are in appropriations. I just came from my appropriations meeting. It could be a rocky road here, but we did pass 2 bills out of committee, so there's a plus.
Would love to hear a little bit more about that, but I'd also like to ask you first about the president's big, beautiful bill. Senator, I saw some local reporting from West Virginia that you were met by a small band of protesters at not a town hall, but a ribbon-cutting event in Fayetteville, in your home state. Do you have any buyer's remorse for this bill, concerns about changes to Medicaid, or will you tell us that these were Democratic activists and this is the cost of doing business?
Well, you know what? I stopped and talked. We talked 10, 15 minutes before the event that was opening up a really beautiful bike trail in Fayetteville, West Virginia. So I'd invite visitors to visit it. And, I tried to talk about the facts of the bill. The facts of the bill is every West Virginia taxpayer will not see their taxes go up. Their taxes will actually go down because we increase the standard deduction. We also provide seniors with a tax break, those that are relying on Social Security, no taxes on tips, no taxes on overtime. So this is an important for West Virginia. Their main focus was, as you would expect, Medicaid. And basically what I tried to tell them and what I believe and why I do not have buyer's remorse is that I believe in order to preserve Medicaid for future generations, we got to get people off of it that don't deserve to be there, that we have to bend the curve in spending. And we will be spending $200 billion over 10 years, just not $1 trillion. And I really think able-bodied people being able to work some for their benefits. In my view, these are not unreasonable asks. And the thing I'm concerned about is, are these programs going to be there in 10, 20 years? And at the rate of growth, the answer is no. So we need to make sure that this is going to the people that it's intended for and serves their health needs the best. The Rural Stabilization Fund is big in my state because obviously we're very rural in West Virginia. And I think this will help our hospitals that have issues, are going to have some issues with affordability.
Well, and that stabilization fund to the tune, of course, of $50 billion. Do you expect, Senator, that to be adequate, not knowing it's not just West Virginia that is going to need the assistance, but states across the country? Or could there be a need that arises for further subsidies for those hospitals?
Well, I think we need to keep in mind, too, that the changes were made on the provider tax and other things on Medicaid don't go into effect for 3 years. So we've got time to adjust here if, in fact, what you're saying is true. I think what we're going to see is our rural hospitals stronger because they're going to run more efficiently. There's going to be ways through CMS and others to make sure that IT systems and everything are better coordinated. I have confidence that rural health care and rural health care delivery is very difficult, and we've got to preserve every avenue, and that means preserving all the rural hospitals in my state and across the country.
We talked a lot, Senator, about the cuts to subsidies for clean energy. We were just discussing wind and solar with Congressman Chuck Fleischman. What does that mean for West Virginia, and will it create a demand for more coal?
Well, I think what it does is it evens the playing field for every resource or every source of energy supply. It also, I think, boosts nuclear energy. We have all this energy demand through AI and data centers. We can't meet the demand, so we need baseload energy, which wind and solar do not provide. It's ephemeral. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. We need that base load, so that's natural gas, coal, nuclear, and there's a hydrogen piece in there that's particularly of interest to me. I asked to move the deadline out just a little bit to see if we can jumpstart a lot of these projects, and I was successful with that. So I think it really just evens the playing field for all energy, all types of energy. And I think it'll be good for my state because we're an energy state.
Senator, I'd like to go back to the subject of appropriations in your seat on the committee. Congressman Fleischman also just told us that he's expecting a short-term continuing resolution is likely going to be required to keep the government funded beyond the end of the fiscal year. Is that also your expectation?
Well, I mean, we wouldn't have to make that decision until the end of September. The Leader Thune, has said with our chair, Chair Collins, and Vice Chair Murray, that we want to have these bills up on the floor. Let's give that a chance to work. I mean, we're running out of time. We only have 7 weeks, but we do have 7 weeks. So hopefully we can have some successes there before I make the declaration that we have to have a continuing resolution. I'd rather see us keep this process moving as much as we can.
All right. Senator, we appreciate your time joining us live from Capitol Hill. Republican Senator Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia here with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. Thank you so much. And we want to continue the conversation now as we turn here to our political panel. Rick Davis is with us, Bloomberg Politics contributor, Republican strategist, and Stonecourt Capital partner, alongside Arshi Siddiqui, former senior aide to former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, now founder and CEO of Bellwether Government Affairs. Welcome to you both. Arshi, to begin with you, we were just speaking with both the senator and the congressman about this notion that Democrats may not have much incentive to make a spending deal with Republicans that are pursuing at the same time rescissions of previously appropriated spending by Congress. We know Nancy Pelosi wasn't afraid to hold a firm line on spending-oriented deals and shutdowns when she needed to. What do you expect to happen here as we approach the end of the fiscal year?
I mean, I think your question was spot on, because the rescissions discussion is going to be critical in terms of paving the future, in terms of not only the continuing resolution, appropriations, et cetera. And as you know, in the Senate has traditionally been very bipartisan. And this rescissions bill, they're talking about changes. And the question is, are they bringing in Democrats? Are they, because, you know, to your point, if you can't rely on a deal that's made, and we've already seen Republicans go back on these types of deals. So I think particularly after this past reconciliation bill, I think it's going to set the tone for the rest of the year.
Rick, would it behoove Republicans to step away from the rescissions plan in hopes of actually clearing a budget before the end of the fiscal year?
I'd love to tell you that I'm enthusiastic that we could get to regular order and have passed 12 appropriations bills before the end of September, but I've given up. You know, mark this day in your calendar. Rick Davis doesn't think the Senate can actually
taken this long.
He's thrown in the towel.
Yeah. So look, I think that the Senate may crater the rescissions package on its own. Right. There are lots of senators concerned about PEPFAR getting stricken, and rural radio, as you mentioned in your last interview, has become a real big issue for people like Senator Rounds and Senator Sullivan. So that may die on its own accord. That being said, whether or not the Senate can actually produce appropriations bills on time, my guess is Thune has a plan to do a continuing resolution. He'll continue the public attitude that we want to do our business. But of course, there's never been anybody fired from a chairmanship because they didn't get the appropriations done. So at the end of the day, count me as skeptical.
Well, when we consider what the Senate Majority Leader might have up his sleeve, it's also a question of the Minority Leader, of Hakeem Jeffries in the House. How should we be thinking about the Democratic calculus here as to whether or not they want to play hardball on this issue, risk a shutdown, how that plays for them politically? I just wonder what kind of leverage they're really working with.
I mean, traditionally, Democrats have always put government first in terms of that continuity. So I think we have seen that quite a bit. But I do think that there is a tried and true blueprint of bipartisan, bicameral negotiations on these packages. I mean, time and time again. I think we're in an aberration in terms of moving away from that in this past negotiation. And, you know, the reconciliation bill, when you have one party control, that is usually given that, you know, when you have the House, White House, and Senate. Sure. But on the appropriations packages and year-end packages, those have generally been bipartisan, and that's a give and take. So I think that's both sides. I mean, so far the Republicans have not been willing to do that give and take, but I do think that Democrats are going to drive a hard bargain. And but again, I think the rescissions package will pave that way.
Hakeem Jeffries has a very different style than Nancy Pelosi
Absolutely,
did.
yes.
What would your former boss have been doing right now? Because I feel like she would have been screaming from the rooftops about this. Hakeem Jeffries has a much more subtle approach. How loud does he need to get about rescissions?
So I think Hakeem Jeffries needs to be Hakeem Jeffries. Yeah? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're in a different era. There's generational shift. I talked to a lot of members of Congress. There's a lot of support for Jeffries. He's very thoughtful. He's very smart. He really does try to put country first. So I think it's a different style. So I don't think we should, that shouldn't be the template. He's also can be very tough. I mean, he's a tough politician. He comes from New York.
And I'm not questioning that, but sometimes you need to put this on Front Street so people know about it.
Absolutely. And you saw him on the floor. I think that was a shining moment for Jeffries, right? Like, the leader was on the floor for 8+ hours. He broke the record. So I think from that perspective, I think Democrats are very united against this bill because it really represents, it's not the usual tax bill that we've seen in the past. It's an ideological bill in many respects. So I think that's going to serve as the blueprint for Jeffries going forward.
Well, Democrats may not like the bill, but it's the bill that the president wanted, Rick, and it's the bill the president ultimately got. To the point you were making a few minutes ago about you think the Senate might ultimately end this rescissions effort all on its own, how is that going to sit with Donald Trump, do you expect?
Well, you know, it's interesting. When the bill was first submitted, there wasn't really a strong commitment by the White House. They said things like, well, you know, we've got more we can send if this one goes through, you know, kind of raising the question that, like, how committed are you to really drive this through? And so, you know, I think this is actually, you know, sort of ball in the Senate court. it's really up to them to decide whether or not they want to see another $100 billion of rescissions coming from the White House, because if this doesn't pass, it's highly likely to raise questions inside the White House whether this is a good commitment of their time and effort, with Congress. They've got a lot of agenda items that they need to get through Congress, and rescission packages have historically never fared well. And in this case, especially when you think you have a backlog of hundreds of billions of dollars of more rescissions to come, does Congress really want to get in that business? I mean, these are very difficult votes for some of these members. And, how many times are you going to ask them to walk the plank?
Just have 30 seconds, Arshi. If this doesn't pass, is this the last vestige of the Doge?
Well, I think what's interesting about the Doge is that there's supposed to be $2 trillion in cuts. And we know, this rescission bill is $9 billion and change. So I think that speaks for a lot.
Bit of a delta there.
Yeah. A little different. Yes, indeed. Arshi, thanks for joining our panel. We'd love to have you back as soon as we can. Arshi Siddiqui and Rick Davis with a smart conversation you'll only hear on Balance of Power here on Bloomberg TV and radio. We've got a lot more to follow here in the program. Alongside Kailey, Leinz, I'm Joe Mathieu. Stay with us on the fastest show in politics. This is Bloomberg.
Here in Washington, where we, of course, are keeping track of domestic developments and changes on that front, but changes in geopolitics as well, or at least changes in attitude, it seems, on the part of President Donald Trump when it comes to the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. Of course, remembering he promised to end the war on day one of his presidency. Here we are in July with still no ceasefire agreement having been made, though his administration has been pushing for one, and he's expressed increasing frustration with the Russian President Vladimir Putin in that regard. So much so, in fact, that he actually reversed a decision made by his own Department of Defense, which was, of course, a pause of weapons, defensive weapons in particular, to Ukraine. That flow is now resuming on the president's orders. And it's something that the former number two to President Trump, at least during his first administration, former Vice President Mike Pence, is pretty happy about. He spoke earlier on Bloomberg Surveillance.
I was pleased that the president countermanded what had been a pause of aid to Ukraine last week, which I think was unfortunate. Wherever it originated, but I commend the president for reversing that decision. And my hope is when the Senate reconvenes that Senator Thune will put the Graham bill on the floor and put it on the president's desk. I think it's time.
Countermanded is an interesting word that Mike Pence uses there, and we want to bring this to an expert, a voice of experience. David Shimer spent time as the director of the National Security Council's Eastern Europe and Ukraine piece, director for Russian affairs in the Biden White House. He's now senior research scholar at Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs. Joining us from world headquarters in New York, David, it's great to have you on Bloomberg TV and radio. Bring us inside the bubble for this. Have you ever heard of an instance quite like this, where the civilian leadership of the Pentagon acted without the approval of the commander-in-chief?
Great to be here. It's hard for me to comment from the outside on the precise decision making that's occurring on the inside. But what I can say is that when I was serving at the National Security Council, there was a robust interagency process where on a daily basis decisions were being made on support for Ukraine at meetings that were chaired by the White House with participation from the Department of Defense, from state, from the intelligence community, and from others, such that coordination would take place and folks being overruled after the fact wouldn't actually have to occur. Whether that process is still taking place, I think is in some doubt given the tumult and changeover at the National Security Council and elsewhere. And I do think that this is a reminder as to the value of having a robust, rigorous government decision-making process around issues as serious as these.
Well, so putting aside how exactly the initial decision was made, let's focus on the president's decision to reverse the initial decision, to resume the flow of aid to Ukraine, knowing that there was a time at which we thought that Ukraine did not necessarily have the explicit support of this particular president. What does it signal to you, David, that this reversal happened, what it means for the way in which the president may be looking at the conflict between Ukraine and Russia now versus before?
So I think it's certainly a good step to reverse whatever pause or decision had been made to halt aid to Ukraine, because Ukraine needs the support and it's in U.S. interest to provide Ukraine with the support. However, I also want to make clear that what was paused and has now been unpaused is aid that was authorized during the Biden administration, during the administration in which I was a part. And that was a drawdown package of $1.25 billion authorized in December of last year that has lasted up until this summer, as well as what's called USAI deliveries that were similarly contracted for last year. And the problem is that those deliveries are running out. And so even though the pause has been lifted, which again is a good step, what matters far more is whether this administration will go further and authorize additional new support for Ukraine, which will provide continued flows over time and enable Ukraine to continue to defend itself over time. And I very much believe that they should do that.
Well, that's a great point that you make here. So we're set to go through the end of summer, which is in about 5 minutes. You've actually gone through this process. Would the administration not have to submit an emergency supplemental request now to prevent a gap in weapons shipments? And what would you be asking for? Would these be defensive systems like Patriots or offensive ballistic missiles?
So as a side point, I struggle with the distinction in this context between defensive and offensive systems, because Ukraine is defending itself and Ukraine is now being provided with artillery and rockets to defend itself that has been unpaused. And so I don't find that distinction especially useful. But taking a step back from that, I would also say that there is approximately $3.8 billion in drawdown authority that still remains available to the president of the United States to use without having to go to Congress. And so tomorrow, this administration could decide to draw down additional weapons from U.S. stockpiles for Ukraine without additional funding or authorization from the Congress is point one. Point two is that the Europeans and the Ukrainians have said explicitly that they want to buy weapons from the United States to give to Ukraine. And so not only would we be furthering our support for Ukraine, there would also be additional generated revenue and trade inflows into the United States. That is another available option to the United States to get weapons to Ukraine. And so there are options to maintain our support beyond what was authorized in December. The question is whether those options will actually be executed upon.
Well, and when we consider the options that the administration has to exercise leverage or to try to influence the behavior of Russia specifically, I wonder what you make, David, of the sanctions package that it seems there is building momentum toward, at least in the United States Senate and possibly with the White House as well. What would this particular package of sanctions do that all of the other previous sanctions package, including the ones that, of course, were pursued by the Biden administration, do to alter the behavior of Vladimir Putin when he is still engaged in this war consistently throughout all of those sanctions being implemented?
So absolutely. I think if we just take a step back here, the reason that Ukraine has agreed to a ceasefire, but Russia has not, is because Russia and President Putin believe that time is on his side. He sees U.S. support as declining. He believes that the longer this war goes on, the more likely it is that his battlefield position will improve compared to Ukraine's. And so the objective in order to get to a ceasefire should be to affect Putin's calculus and make him believe that time is not on his side. And how do you do that? A, you continue and even surge weapons flows, as we just discussed. B, to your point, I believe that sanctions against Russia's energy sector should be intensified, built upon sanctions that have already been implemented, in order to increase the pressure on the Russian economy and make it more challenging for Russia to sustain its war of aggression. Third, something that we haven't yet discussed, is I believe that the Europeans should move towards seizing the approximately $300 billion in Russian sovereign assets that are immobilized in its jurisdictions in order to provide Ukraine with a long-term source of support, both to help Ukraine, but also to send a message to Russia that aid for Ukraine will not dry up with time. If you do those three things, surge weapons deliveries, intensify sanctions, and acquire a long-term source of assistance through the sovereign assets, that recipe could be enough to adjust Putin's thinking and to push him to the table in a meaningful way.
All right, David, great to have you here on Balance of Power. David Shimer, former director for Russia at the National Security Council, in addition to former director for Eastern Europe and Ukraine at the National Security Council in the Biden White House. We appreciate you joining us here on Balance of Power, especially on a day when we saw the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, actually meeting with Russia's Sergei Lavrov in Kuala Lumpur to talk about this conflict. And I guess, Joe, I shouldn't just say Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He is also, of course, acting national security advisor Marco Rubio, one of just many administration officials that are now juggling multiple job titles. We got a new one overnight as well. The Transportation Secretary, Sean Duffy, announced on True Social by President Trump last night, is also now interim administrator of NASA.
NASA, yes. Which is really an interesting development here, because we all remember how things ended with Jared Isaacman, a pick of Elon Musk's. Huge questions about the future of our space program, Kailey, and exactly what Sean Duffy knows about this remains a mystery to me. So we wanted to talk to an expert here. By the way, this is the second Fox News anchor running a major government agency.
Yeah, let's talk to that said expert now. Keith Cowing, editor of NASAWatch.com, is with us on Balance of Power. Keith, do you see Sean Duffy as being up to this job?
Well, call me not surprised. Truth Social, Fox News host, reality star running an agency. Sure. I don't think he probably had the qualifications to run transportation, and that's where you rely on the people underneath you. But Department of Transportation runs things that I think are more familiar to people, airplanes and so forth. NASA's sort of all about rocket science, and you really kind of need to appreciate that. And if you don't even have a little bit of that expertise, you're going to be leaning on a whole bunch of people to do 99% of the heavy lifting.
Some big decisions, of course, need to be made about the future of the program, Keith, and it's great to have you back. You were a big Isaacman fan. What will NASA lose without having him at the helm?
Yeah, Jared Isaacman had a lot of the right stuff for this. I mean, he'd been in space. He quite was the engineering nerd. He knew how to run businesses. He knew what things cost and so forth. And he had the energy and enthusiasm, and he wanted to do it. So I guess the bad part of that is he was a friend of Elon Musk's, and that's now not a good thing to be. And Sean Duffy and Musk went head-to-head, so that's a good thing. I don't know. I mean, this is almost like, sometimes, who's dating who in seventh grade,
Well, fair enough. As we consider the agency that Duffy will, at least on an interim basis, be helming, and the position NASA is in, especially with reports of job cuts and people leaving the agency, Keith, how would you characterize its overall state right now?
Well, it's I used to work there, and I had to leave the agency as a personal decision under similar but maybe less angry circumstances a decade or two ago. And now my watch is being all day from friends saying, I took the buyout, I'm leaving, and so forth. And it's 25-year-olds, 45-year-olds, 65-year-olds, engineers, scientists, managers, and it's dialing up, it's increasing, and people call me at night crying. This is not good. And, the whole thing is, with the Trump administration, I heard it today in a hearing when they're talking appropriations, talking about budgets, and we're going to beat China, whatever. All right, let's just say it's a thing to do to beat China in space, science and technology. Okay, lots of smart people, money, missions, good timeline, good planning. That's what you need. Well, what they're doing is they're cutting the budget. They don't have a timeline. They don't have a plan, and they're cutting the smart people up 20, 30, sometimes up to 40% in some places. How is that preparing yourself for beating anybody in anything? It's antithetical to that notion. I'm just waiting for the excuses to what you get once it's all done. I haven't heard it yet.
What do you make of the double business card, Keith, that Kailey mentioned? He's not the first member of the cabinet now to carry multiple jobs. He's running transportation. Is there time to run NASA?
I don't know. This seems to be a thing right now. I mean, I guess the FBI guy runs ATF or did, and Rubio's all over the place. I mean, again, what it comes back to is you signed the forms, but you've got, people actually doing the work. And the more ways you're spread thin, the more people are doing your job for you. And so I don't know. I mean, I don't know how this place works. The good thing, though, is that if you want to talk about visibility, is that Duffy has a good relationship with Trump. He can text him. And really, the place at NASA is being run right now by Brian Hughes, who's a former Trump political guy, who's a pal of Susie Wiles in the White House. So if your agency has a direct hotline into the White House and you need something, that's good. But on the other hand, what is expected is that Duffy will be an absolute adherent to whatever the White House tells him to do. And right now, that's cut. That's bad. So, we'll see what happens. Tomorrow's a new day. Something may change.
There was only one man we could talk to about this story, and that's Keith Cowing, NASAWatch.com. Keith, great to see you. And thanks for coming back to talk to us on Bloomberg. Kailey and I will meet you coming up later, the late edition at 5 p.m. Eastern here on Bloomberg.